you note
national interest, verify copies that sides picked up, between Ambassador Bolton and James Kelly, looking at what were next steps for North Korea policy. It looks like Ambassador Bolton is probably feeling vindicated at the moment.
I always do.
And probably doesn't need much introduction, but is currently a senior fellow at AEI, as I'm sure you all are aware, and has spent many years in and out of government, last in his stint as ambassador to the UN. I can hand it over to you.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Justine. Thanks to all of you for coming. I thought rather than just recapitulate what I wrote in the debate with Jim Kelly, I try and put this in a kind of broader context, because I think the debate over what our North Korea policy should be is an indication of a larger problem, and I think it's also going to be front and center in the new Obama administration, given the criticism that Senator Obama made, particularly the Bush administration, during his campaign. And I think these are issues that the United States has been reluctant to confront, but I think should confront. I think part of our problem is that we haven't talked about it enough. Although with the presence of so many scholars, especially Fred, who literally wrote the book on negotiation, I don't mean to say that the subject hasn't come up before, but I would offer a few thoughts on the subject to put the question of North Korea into what I believe is a more appropriate context. The first area really deals with a misapprehension about why you negotiate in the first place. And I think we've seen over the past several years this question turned into a kind of caricature of the debate by the media and by some critics of the Bush administration in particular. So that on the one hand, you have the picture of the wildly irrational Bush administration doesn't negotiate with anybody. Its knee-jerk response to any international problem is regime change or the use of military force. Whereas on the other hand, you have the nice, reasonable people who understand that you have to talk to enemies and you can't only talk with friends. I think that is obviously wildly inaccurate. I think actually the debate over the role of diplomacy, the role of negotiation, is between two different groups of people. On the one hand is the group that believes that diplomacy and negotiation should be used to solve 99 1/44% of the world's problems. The old Ivory Snow commercial, 99 1/44% pure. That's the group that thinks 99 1/44% of the world's problems should be solved through diplomacy. That's the group I belong to. That is one side of the debate versus the other side that says that 100% of the world's problems should be solved through diplomacy. That's the group that has the problem. And that's the group that misunderstands, I think, what the proper role of diplomacy and negotiation is. Related to that is the concept, the implicit concept, that the resort to negotiation or diplomacy is essentially cost-free. And I don't mean in simple monetary expenditures, I mean in the broad definition of cost, including opportunity cost. And you can see that when people ask rhetorically, well, what have we got to lose by talking to X or to Y or to Z? My view is that diplomacy is just like every other human activity. It has costs and it has benefits. And that for a U.S. policymaker, the issue with respect to diplomacy is like is the same as with respect to any other tactic or instrument of U.S. Power and influence. Is it appropriate in these circumstances? Do we expect it to achieve our objectives? Is the resort to diplomacy outweighed by costs that we can determine? What are the risks? It's not a simple question, or it should not be a simple question. And I think this is the question of cost is very graphically demonstrated by not only North Korea, but Iran. Two issues dealing with proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Because one of the critical costs of diplomacy is time. Time that you lose during the course of negotiations. Time that works to somebody's advantage, because it always works to somebody's advantage. And in general, since time is always on the side of the proliferator, prolonged negotiations without an outcome tend to work to the proliferator's advantage. Why is that? Because proliferation, especially nuclear proliferation and development of ballistic missile delivery capabilities, is very complex scientifically and technologically. The proliferator, the would-be proliferator, has to amass the technology and the materials, he has to assemble them, test them, develop them, and ultimately to find out whether they're going to work. And I think the history of over 5 years of the six-party talks with North Korea, and over 5 years, really quite interestingly covering almost exactly the same period, 5 years of EU-led negotiation with Iran, has left us in both cases with the clear advantage going to the proliferator. North Korea has kept its nuclear capability. For all we know, it's refined it, gotten better at weaponization, made other advances, certainly kept the regime in power. And Iran has spent 5 years of very intense European negotiations overcoming all of the scientific and technological barriers that it had to achieving nuclear weapons. So both of these are really almost clinical studies of the cost of negotiation. There are other costs too, the political cost of legitimizing regimes like North Korea and Iran. And you can imagine playing out others. It depends on the facts and circumstances of the particular problem that you're looking at. But the point is, diplomacy is not cost-free. Diplomacy does have costs that have to be weighed. And in the overwhelming number of cases, you will resort to diplomacy, even if you don't think it's likely to be terribly effective. For example, an issue I've not been involved in, as I will reveal immediately, but we have had a dispute with Canada for close to 30 years over, it's either hardwood lumber or softwood lumber. Norm probably knows. Is it hardwood or softwood?
Hardwood.
Hardwood, there you go. We've been at this for decades, and we've done it all diplomatically, and we still don't have it resolved as far as I know, which is not to say I don't favor the continuation of diplomacy.
John, it was resolved.
Was it resolved? As I say, I haven't
But
been
it's a
involved.
great example anyway.
But it did take 30 years,
Yeah,
didn't it?
something
Good,
like that.
Good. And if you don't see diplomacy as having the same metric as every other human